And I remember specifically one day I was in my room and I was praying and I was like, God, I just need you to take this away from me. I don't understand why I'm having to deal with this. It's been this long. I feel like I'm dying. I'm afraid. I just don't know what's going on. And I remember him speaking to my heart, and he said, if your body never receives its healing, am I still enough?
Welcome to the Uncuffed podcast, where I and my guests talk about life, leadership, and hope. I'm your host, Kanal Cuffy, and I'm here today with someone who has a truly amazing story. Her name is Pastor Faith Simmons, and she's a really good friend of mine, as most of my guests have been. But I think her story and her testimony can really change lives, and I'm interested to talk to her about it and for you to hear her story as well. So the name of this episode 12, is Lessons in Gratitude. And who better than Faith Simmons to talk about gratitude? So Faith, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I am grateful to be here today.
Awesome.
This is going to be great.
What you did there. That's awesome. So yeah, Faith, so as I told the audience, you have a really interesting story. You are an ordained pastor, but your life didn't really start out that way. And by all signs, from what I know, it didn't point to this as where you would end up. So can you kind of talk about your childhood and growing up? What was it like growing up in your household?
Right. So I was an only child. And I did grow up in a Christian home. Both of my parents, they're still together. They're still married. Just great, loving family, great childhood. When I turned, let's say 15, I guess, somewhere 14 or 15, things began to take a little bit of a turn for me. So up until that point, I had been raised in church, and my family, they were of the mindset of, if the door of the church is open, we're there. Nothing's going to get in the way of us being there. We were there Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesdays. It was ingrained in me that God was supposed to be first. And so around the age of 14, 15, 16, I think all of us kind of come to this point to where we're like, okay, I want to be more of my own person. Who am I? And unfortunately for me, I began to hang out with the wrong people and the wrong friends. And I began to make just some very unwise choices and just began this downward spiral of walking away from my faith, walking away from all that had been instilled in me as a child. And, I'm talking like drugs and partying and just all of these things that were completely opposite of who I was up until that point. And at that time, I could see and sense even just the pain and the struggles that my parents were dealing with in the midst of the choices that I was making. But as many teenagers, was very selfish, and it was all about me and what made me happy and what I wanted to do. And I remember the turning point was at the age of 16 when, as an only child, I had to sit in front of my parents and tell them that their only child was expecting her own child, that I was pregnant at the age of 16. And I remember just the whole family being there in tears. And it was a scary thing. It was very scary in many ways. I mean, just the initial having to announce this to my parents, and how are they going to receive this? And so I had actually gone to my youth pastor at the time and had shared it with them first and was like, hey, will you guys sit in with me on this conversation with my parents? So he and his wife were there present with us. And of course they said, okay, we're going to sit there with you, but you're going to be the one to tell your parents this, this needs to come from you. But we're going to be there to kind of talk you guys through this and walk you through it. And so they were there with us for that initial conversation. And again, I remember just the tears and the pain and just the disappointment in their faces. And I think what was the worst part was that my father himself said absolutely nothing.
Really?
He said absolutely nothing. My mom is kind of having this conversation. And I remember the youth pastor asking my father, like, well, you haven't really said anything. What is on your mind right now? And the only thing he said was, this was to be expected. And it was like a knife to the heart, like, oh gosh, which I deserved, of course, because of the choices that I was making, the lifestyle that I was living. So there was some struggles, obviously, being a young teenager that was now pregnant. And one of the very first thoughts I had was, okay, for every decision that I make from this point forward no longer just affects me. It's going to affect my child as well. And I decided, you know what, as hard as I ran away from God, I'm going to run towards God and I'm going to run after God. And so, I had that conversation with God and, I asked for his forgiveness and I asked for his help and his strength because I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I didn't know how difficult that was going to be. And so as you can imagine, somebody who has in a way walked away from a good core group of Christian friends to be with friends that were the exact opposite and living in the world and making a lot of difficult choices. I had to make the choice that, okay, I've got to walk away from these friends that I've made or the people that I consider to be my friends who have been the bad influence. And I've got to get back to the people that are going to help me and are going to encourage me to move in the right direction. That wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. And I remember the first Sunday back in church, I remember so vividly going and sitting down and with, the youth group had like this certain area that they all sat in this section. And I remember going and sitting down and thinking, okay, I'm back. I'm doing this. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to move towards God. And, I'm doing this for myself and for my child. And I sit down. And some of my other friends had come and they had sat down around me. And one of them came and sat down and I just happened to look over the direction they were looking. They were looking at their parent that was sitting across the room and their parents looking at them, shaking their head.
Oh my.
Like, don't sit with her. Don't sit next to her. You're not, And that was the beginning of what I found to be a very difficult season that I had to walk through of, okay, I've made the decision that I am going to be the person that God's called me to be. I'm going to be a different person. But finding those people that were still going to be there for me, the people that still wanted to be my friend despite the fact of, that I had made mistakes or I had made bad choices. So that was a difficult season to walk through, for sure.
And as a teenager, I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes here, feeling like church was your home at one point, and now that home is almost being stripped away by the very people that said that they love you. Mm-hmm. How did that feel, when you were going through that? And who were you able to rely on at that point to kind of keep you stable and grounded?
Right. So many times it felt very alone. My parents were there for me. I was able to rely on my parents. But there was always this sense of guilt or shame or embarrassment, I guess I would say. So I knew my parents were there for me, but the relationship just felt different. I mean, it was probably more me than it was them in a way. So I knew my parents were there for me. There were some leaders in the church that were there for me. There were a few friends that were there for me. But what I really had to do at that point was lean into God. Before I walked away and started making these bad choices, I had a solid relationship with God. There were times that I really sensed his voice. I sensed him speaking to me. I was called into ministry at the altar at the age of 14. I sensed him speak to my heart. So I knew God was real. And so I had to go back to that place in my mind and in my heart that, even though people may fail me, God never will. God never has. Even though I feel shame and embarrassment when I'm around these people, I don't feel that when I'm with God. I don't feel that when I'm talking to God. I feel the love and the compassion that draws me in, that keeps me saying, okay, I'm not going to go back to where I was, that I need to keep pressing forward, no matter how frustrating it may seem, no matter how hurt I may feel by people that I thought were there for me, people that I thought were friends or thought that were my core group. God's not going to fail me. You know, he was a constant in my life. And so that was what kept me on that path of following him and trusting him, because when I would go in and talk to him and be in his presence, I just sensed nothing but love and acceptance from him. And that was something that I didn't get everywhere else.
That makes sense, man. Mm-hmm. So fast forward a little bit, you give birth to your son. Mm-hmm. What's going through your mind in that moment? And who was there to kind of help you along with finances or housing? Like, did you end up going back to living with your parents? Like, how did that work for you?
Yes. So I stayed with my parents for the first year. Austin was born when I was 17. And so Austin's father, Chris, who I'm now married to, we actually ended up getting married a year later when I turned 18. And we're still together. It's been 25 years.
Congratulations.
And yeah, thank you. And so, so my parents were there for me. My husband was there for me. It was a short period of time, but seemed like a long journey. You know, as you can imagine, there's a lot of maturing that you have to do from, you know, a teenager to all of a sudden having to step into the role of a mom and a wife and an adult. So I'm sure I messed up a whole lot. I'm sure there was a lot of mistakes that I made. I can guarantee it.
Chris, don't you dare say anything.
Yeah, don't point that out. But yeah, it was a difficult season, but it was a growing season for me.
Wow. Okay, man. So I love the fact that you and Chris are still together. Mm-hmm. That's pretty unique. That's pretty awesome. But the trials didn't end there for you guys. So from what I know of your life, you guys face a lot of hurdles going through. So can you elaborate on that? Like, what are some of the things that you guys faced, and how did you keep going? What made you keep going?
Right. So there's two hurdles that really stand out to me in my mind. And one of those was when our children were a bit younger. We had just decided to homeschool. We had 4 kids, and we're going to take this journey of homeschooling. And we had recently moved into a house that was owned by a guy in our church. And so we're renting this house from him. And at the time, my husband was also working for him. So he owned his own business, and he had hired my husband to be his manager of his store while he moved back home to another state to open a second location. Well, unfortunately, one day I'm at home homeschooling the kids, and we get this knock on the door. And there's a real estate agent standing at the door, and she says, "Do you live here?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Well, you do realize this house is going to be auctioned off on Saturday."
Wait, what?
Yes. This was a Wednesday. And she's telling me that the house we're living in, that we just paid rent on, is going to be auctioned on Saturday.
Wait a minute. Pause. So you're living in the house, mm-hmm. and the owner who your husband works for has basically defaulted on that house.
Correct.
And didn't tell you that that house is now owned by the bank and going into auction.
Correct.
How does that?
So we had seen a few things. So there had been some like bill collectors had been calling the store my husband worked at. And so we already had an idea that there were some financial issues going on with the business. And so my husband had a discussion only a few days prior, like, "Hey, should I be looking for another job, or is there something going on?" And he was open at that point and said, "Yeah, you probably should be looking for something else." So we already knew, okay, his job is ending. He needs to be finding something else. A few days later, we find out it's worse than we thought it was.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that's as bad as it can get, really.
And honestly, what made it even worse were these were people that were supposed to be friends of ours. They were friends of ours that had attended. They were leaders in our church at the time. And so for me, I'm like, I'm freaking out. Like, oh my gosh, what is going on inside? There's this sudden like chaos turmoil. Like, what are we going to do? And I remember calling Chris and telling him what's going on. And he's like, look, you need to calm down. It's going to be okay. We just have to trust God. And it was almost like this switch just goes off in my mind. And from that point on, we went from what are we going to do to I can't wait to see what God does through this. Because we understood that this is completely out of our hands. What we had, the only money we had paid to them in rent. Like, there is nothing at this point that we can do. We have to fully rely on God in this situation. So God, this is all yours. I can't wait to see how you're going to fix this one, you know? And I feel like it was a God thing. Like, he just gave us this peace. As we said, I'm going to trust him. He gave us this peace to walk through that situation. And there were people, friends of ours and family, that were like, you need to be mad at them. You need to say this. You need to do this. And we would say, we're not going to do that. God would not have us treat them that way. You know, we're responsible for the way that we act, regardless of how someone else acts. You know, I'm responsible for my own actions. And that was how we looked at it. And we're going to treat them out of love and out of respect. We're going to move on, and we're going to trust God in this. And through that situation, it was probably 6 months down the road, my husband ends up with an amazing job, better than we thought he could ever have, that got us out of debt. We were able to purchase our first home. And so one of the lessons I felt that we learned through that particular situation is that the way that we respond when we are in a difficult situation can dictate the outcome. Because I truly believe that God blessed us and was able to bless us. He opened his hands of blessings in our life because of the way that we responded.
Absolutely.
Because we responded the way that he expected us to do it. Instead of out of unforgiveness or anger or bitterness, we just loved them. And we told them, we're not going to hold unforgiveness. We forgive you guys. We love you guys. And so I think that was one of the biggest lessons that we learned was how, when we have these difficult situations, how are we going to respond? Because that's going to dictate the outcome.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect example of the fruit of the Spirit fleshed out in real life. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, the Bible talks about what's in you comes out, right? Mm-hmm. In situations. So kudos to you and Chris for having the obedience and the maturity to be able to go through a situation like that. Because I got to be honest with you, I don't think I would have responded that way. And I don't think 99% of the people that are listening or watching right now would have responded that way. So that is truly a lesson in gratitude. Mm-hmm. Right there is an understanding, like, sometimes you just have to choose forgiveness over retaliation. Right. And let God do what God does best. And he takes care of both parties in that way. Right. And that's amazing. So,
and I think a lot of it is just leaning into him. Like, you know, you look at your past circumstances of where God has come through time and time again in the past. And you realize, okay, as I leaned into him, as I trusted him, he came through, you know? And so any of these type of situations, it's like, I've got two choices. You know, what are the pros and cons? How is it going to benefit me? How is it going to benefit my family if I harbor unforgiveness, if I harbor bitter? Like, this fixes absolutely nothing. So why not just move forward? Why not forgive the way God wants us to forgive? Why not love the way God tells us to love? And no, it's not always easy. And it obviously didn't come from us, because this flesh doesn't want to do it. This flesh wants to harbor unforgiveness. Yeah. Again, it's leaning into God and saying, God, okay, this is how I feel. And it's okay to tell God how you feel, because he already knows. This is how I feel, but this is what I know that your word says. And I need your help to do this. I need your help to forgive. I need your help to love, because it's not always easy.
I love how you said that. This is what your word says. And that's a really distinct cross junction between what you said of feelings and action, right? Like the fact that you did exactly what Jesus did in the Bible when he was tempted by Satan, you used the word to say, this is how I will anchor my life and my actions to it. So for you to have the ability in that moment to say, God, your word says this, so I will obey this, regardless of what the outcome could be, because the outcome may not have been favorable for you for a long time.
Right.
But somehow God was able to redeem that situation for you through your obedience.
Right.
So that's a lesson for me, even right now, to go through. Because sometimes in this season of my life, I'll be honest with you guys, like I struggle with the idea of gratitude at times. And that's why, sitting down with you, I think is a really healthy thing. And just hearing how your gratitude is all based on biblical principles. And I need to hear that. I know someone else probably needs to hear that. But that story right there, even if we ended the podcast episode right now, I think that story changed someone's life.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've walked through that and you're coming out on the other side saying, but God, incredible.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that God's word is truth. God's word is true. My feelings are not. And so we have to remember that. Well, I feel this way. I feel betrayed. I feel hurt. I feel angry. But what is true? What's true is what's found in God's word. It's his promises. He talks about love and peace and patience, like you were saying, the fruits of the Spirit. And the thing is a lot of times these situations kind of test us, because the more we lean into God when we're not in these difficult situations is what's preparing us for when we are in these difficult situations, right? Because what's in here is what's going to come out. So a lot of times, we'll get in these difficult situations and we run to God, and then everything falls back into place. And then it's like, okay, well, we put God on the back burner. We put spending time with him on the back burner. But we have to constantly be ready, because there's always going to be these situations, right? I mean, God's word tells us that there's going to be trials. In this world, you're going to face trials and tribulations, right? It's going to happen. So we need to be ready for them. And the only way to do that is to be in his word, which is where we find the truth, where we find the wisdom for when we are in those situations. It's kind of like building our arsenal for those spiritual battles that we are going to face. So another trial that we faced was one a little bit more recent, and that was in 2016. I had a health issue, a health crisis, and it took about a year and a half before I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. So within that year and a half, I had a lot of frustration not understanding what was going on with me. So I'm having fluctuations in my heart rate, and I'm feeling like I'm going to pass out, and I'm having issues with certain types of lighting, and I'm feeling weak. I lost 25 pounds in 3 months. I was having episodes of panic attacks. Never had panic attacks in my entire life. Like, I was experiencing all of this stuff, all of these symptoms all at one time, and thinking, what is wrong with me? And over that period of time, I was at doctor after doctor after doctor, and they're all saying, oh, you just have anxiety. You just have anxiety. I'm like, I know my body. I know I'm not just having anxiety. Something is wrong with me. Like, I felt sick for the first time. I've always considered myself to feel like healthy, to be a healthy person. I felt sick. I knew something was wrong. And it led me to a state of depression, a state of almost constant anxiousness. And also in the midst of that, had to have a major surgery. I had to have a hysterectomy in the midst of that. So just a lot of things that were going on that just took me to this dark place, to be honest with you. And there were friends that I had reached out to, for prayer, and, just different people that I was leaning in on, and just wasn't seeing any difference. I felt like I was doing all the right things and wasn't seeing a difference. And I remember specifically one day I was in my room and I was praying and I was like, God, I just need you to take this away from me. I don't understand why I'm having to deal with this. It's been this long. I feel like I'm dying. I'm afraid. I just don't know what's going on. And I remember him speaking to my heart, and he said, if your body never receives its healing, am I still enough? Am I still enough? Is what I have already done for you still enough for you to worship me, for you to still follow me, and it was like, I realized that I had been going after the healing rather than the healer.
Say that again one more time, because that's crucial.
I had been seeking the healing rather than the healer. How many times when we're in a difficult situation do we seek the gift rather than the giver? That the gift becomes more important to us, and it began to shift my mindset, that instead of me taking this time every day to sit there and beg God to give me what I feel like I needed, instead I would find praises in his word, like from Psalm 105, and just thank him for what he'd already done for me. And it just shifted my whole mindset. Like, yes, God, you are enough. What you have done for me is enough. Even despite all of these, he's healed my body in the past. He provided for us financially. Even if he hadn't even done all of that, if I look at what he's already done is enough for me, And there's a pastor that I listen to. His name's Bill Johnson from Bethel Church. And unfortunately, his wife passed away this past year of breast cancer. She passed away on a Thursday, and he spoke on a Sunday, just a few days after his wife passed, which is crazy to me. But one of the things that just shook my world, he's up there and he said, I keep getting this question, why did she die? He's like, we were praying, we were fasting. There were people that were actually like prayer walking around his home, all throughout the day, just praying for her healing. And he said, I'm going to tell you guys what I told them. I can't answer that. I don't know why my wife's body did not receive her healing. He said, but this is what I do know. God owes me nothing and I owe him everything.
You're dropping some major heat
today.
I was
like,
Faith.
What? Like that? I mean, just to let that sink in, that God owes us nothing, but we owe him everything. When I think about gratitude, the opposite of gratitude is selfishness, right? Selfishness is all about me, what I need. So if I'm not grateful, I'm being selfish. I'm thinking, okay, God, you owe this to me. I need healing. It's almost as if you owe me healing. You owe me a financial breakthrough. You owe me a job. You owe me. God doesn't owe us anything. Like if I were to receive what I truly deserved, honestly, I'd spend an eternity in hell, right?
That's
because
right, yeah.
I'm a sinful person. I make mistakes all the time. But he gave his son for us, right? He gave us an eternity with him, and he owes us nothing. And sometimes I think we just need to take a step back and realize that, God, you've already done so much for me. And I'm not just coming to you, and I'm not just going to worship you because I want something from you, but because of who you are and what you've already done.
Man, I got to let that sink in a little bit. The idea that God owes us nothing and we owe him everything.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking to myself, how do I teach that to my kids? And you said it already. You're a mother of 4, and you're also a grandmother, which is awesome.
4.
Of 4, that's right.
Yes.
And I'm almost wondering, with that knowledge that you have, how do you teach that or help apply that to your kids who are all adults now, right?
Yeah.
And your grandkids? How do you and Chris incorporate the idea of such an admiration and just grateful attitude towards the creator of the universe?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing is just by modeling it. Like anything that we teach our kids is by modeling it first. I can say one thing and do another. My kids they watch our lives, right? They watch what we do. They watch how we respond to things. A lot of these situations that we dealt with that I just talked about, our kids were right there along with us. And, I just shared with you how, at first when I was dealing with these health issues, thinking, oh my gosh, this could kill me. I was living in fear. I was living in turmoil. My kids saw that. But what they also saw was their mom be pulled out of that and their mom lean into God. And I was pulled out of it as I leaned into God. So I feel like example is the first thing. And, when we walk through these difficult situations, showing our kids and teaching them, okay, yeah, we might be having this difficult situation, but I'm going to trust God in this. And they see you and hear you praying, and they see you in his word. And maybe you take I would take scriptures and write them on cards, like promises, and I would post them on the refrigerator. I'd post them on the bathroom mirror. It was for me, but my kids are seeing this. They're watching this, so that when they have these situations arise in their life, okay, this is how mom dealt with it. This is how dad dealt with it, and it worked for them. They trusted God, and God came through for them. So I think that's the biggest thing. But we also have the advantage of knowing our children, and so one of the things that I've realized with gratitude is, a lot of times it's hidden beneath layers, right? So there might be a layer of pride. There might be a layer of unforgiveness. There might be a layer of selfishness or envy or jealousy. And we have to strip those things off. And so I can't just go into my kid's room and say, okay, you know what? You just need to be grateful. You just need to look at the glass half full. Well, there's a lot of seeds of bitterness that have been planted there because they've got layer upon layer of these sins that have taken root in their life that really need to be stripped away as well before they can get to a heart of gratitude. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
So we also need to work on the fact that you've got unforgiveness towards your sibling, or we've got some pride issues that we need to work on. So sometimes these things go hand in hand. So that's the benefit of knowing our children or our grandchildren, is we can see other areas that may be preventing them from getting to that place of gratefulness in their situations.
Yeah, that's so good. Oh man. Stripping away the layers. I'm gonna steal that one from you, if that's okay.
Okay, no, absolutely.
But seriously, that's really good, because I think about, even in my own life, times when I was facing really heavy trials, and you're right, I had to go to God in order to get certain things healed. I think about when my wife and I had miscarriages, and my relationship with my dad, and the loss of jobs too, right? Like just the idea of, I could not see the forest from the trees because there were too many things blocking my view. There were too many layers, as you put it,
right,
over my heart for me to truly be able to say, man, God is so good. Like, I had the head knowledge. The whole time I had the head knowledge, but it wasn't able to leak into my heart because there were so many things, so many barriers to entry. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty solid right there.
Yeah. And, a lot of times it's about your focus. So as a kid, I loved Where's Waldo books. Do you remember Where's Waldo
good.
books?
Yeah, I remember. I loved
those, And so you get into this book and you've got this page that's full of all of this stuff, and you've got to dig in and you've got to find Waldo, who may just be sticking his head behind a tree,
right.
Whatever, to find him. But for me, I didn't just find Waldo and then flip the page and go to the next one, right? I didn't just focus on Waldo. So because half the fun of those books was just the chaos that was going on the page. You know what I'm talking about?
There's always something wacky. Yes, you're right.
So if I'm focused in on Waldo, I'm going to completely miss the fact that this guy over here is slipping on the banana peel, carrying the can of paint, going to dump it on this lady's head that's sunning herself on the beach. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is great stuff. This is funny. This is what brings a smile to my face. This is what, makes me laugh. But I have to zoom out my view from focusing on Waldo to see that. So I kind of see it as the same thing. Like, a lot of times, like, our focus, will be so focused and zoomed in on the problem. But if we just zoom out for a minute, we can see, okay, yeah, we have a difficulty here, but I zoom out and I see God's hand over here, and I see God's hand over here. And, oh, you know what? Here's an answer to prayer. Here's an answer. God's moving here. And there's all these other areas that God has been moving in, whether it's in the past or even currently, blessings that God has put before us. And we can choose to either focus on just this narrow little problem, which it may be a big problem, but look at all the other great things, so I have the choice of what I'm going to focus on. And the problem is that when we focus only on the issue, instead of focusing on all the other great things that God has done and is doing, that we're taking glory from him. We're withholding praise from him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like when you look at a tapestry, if you only look at one section or one stitching, it looks terrible, actually, but when you zoom out, you can see the full spectrum. And especially I love stained glass windows. I'm not really like an old school church person, but I do love stained glass windows. And if you look at an individual glass, it looks dirty, it looks broken, it looks disheveled. But when you step back and you see, and the light comes in and it hits it, you're like, man, that is one amazing piece of artwork.
Yes. So
I love how you use the Where's Waldo reference, because that was artwork. Somebody took the time to sketch and color that entire thing. They had to conceptualize it. They had to build it. And all for us as little kids, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, to find the one character that they didn't even finish. Like you never got his full body.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, you look at that and you're like, man. And what you're saying is you're taking in the entirety of that person's work. You're not letting a single pen stroke, a single coloration go to waste, because you're appreciating every piece of work that they put into that amazing tapestry in that book, and you're not trying to miss that.
Right.
So that's a good lesson right there.
Exactly. And we need to remember that gratitude doesn't come by chance. It's a choice, right? I mean, a lot of times we can sit back and say, well, you know what? I would be grateful if my financial situation changed. I would be grateful if I had a different job. I'd be grateful if we're in a different life situation. But what if that doesn't happen? Or what if it does happen, but chances are something else is going to come up, so we have to choose. It can't happen by chance. We can't leave our gratitude up to chance. It has to be a choice that we make in every decision, because true gratitude is going to happen when I'm grateful, even in the midst of the difficult situation. What is it that I'm going to choose to focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking about gratitude, as I mentioned at the top, you are a pastor, and you pastor a church of what, about 90 to 100 people on average? And almost everyone is a volunteer.
Yes.
Almost everyone. That being said, you have one of the most faithful group of volunteers that I have ever met. And there's something that you and your husband, Chris, are doing there at Berkeley Springs that is allowing these people to keep that fire for the ministry. So can you talk a little bit about what you do to appreciate your team and to just show them the gratitude that you've discovered through all these years of hardships?
I would say the biggest thing is relationship. Just finding ways, I try to find ways that I can communicate to our volunteers that they're not just a number. They're not just another volunteer. And as leaders, we can get busy, right? And so it doesn't always have to be I don't always have to take them out for an entire day, because you don't have time to do that. But maybe I take them out for a cup of coffee, or I'll send out a text message bi-weekly to a lot of my volunteers. Hey, I'm praying for you today, or how can I pray for you today? So in other words, if you are on the recipient end of that, and your leader sends you a text that says, how can I pray for you today? your thought is, okay, they're thinking about me, right? They're thinking about me. They value what's going on in my life. And so you share a prayer request with them, and then you see them on Sunday, or you see the next time you see them, you're like, hey, how is this going? I've been praying for you in this. And those things show that you value that person. And so a lot of times we have to ask, as leaders, am I leading for myself or am I leading for others? Because if I'm leading for myself, it's about getting ahead. It's about building myself. But if I'm leading for others, it's about building them. And so what does that look like? How do I build this person? How do I help, bring them alongside me? How do I help them grow as a parent, as a grandparent, as a spouse, not just in the volunteer role they're in, but if I'm investing in other areas of their life, again, it's showing that I value them. I'm not just saying, oh, I value you, but it's proof. The proof is in the pudding, right?
Exactly.
So that's one of the biggest ways, and one of the easiest ways. I feel like it just kind of comes naturally when your focus is in the right place to build other people.
Yeah, that's so good. So I'm going to anticipate the pushback here that somebody may say, well, that only works in the church, or that only works in a situation where everyone's, putting their time in a volunteer manner. Do you think that someone that's in the corporate world, someone maybe listening who's in the corporate world, or who's a manager of a coffee shop or whatever, are some of those same concepts, are they still true for them? And how can they benefit from the idea of simply wading into the life of the people that are under their care?
Yeah. I would say it's absolutely a benefit. I feel like a leader is only as strong as the team that's behind them. So even in the corporate world, you want your team to support you. You want your team to also look out for you, right? If you think about building a strong relationship with a team member, they're going to come in and they're not only going to do their job for a paycheck, but they're going to do their job because they want to make you look good. Because Absolutely. They like you, because they know that you value them. They have buy-in to what they're doing. You think of it as like a tug of war, right? So you could get a team on each side of tug of war, usually have a team captain.
That's right.
So they're kind of like out front and they're kind of leading and they're encouraging everyone. Well, you're not going to get anywhere if the team captain's the only one pulling on that rope.
You're right.
You want the rest of them to be completely invested in tugging that rope with you and moving the right direction. And I feel like that's one of the biggest ways to do that, is to create buy-in with your team members. And to do that, you show them that you value them. Yeah,
that's good. And I know that something that we do and you do at Berkeley Springs is you actually budget for appreciation. It's not just, you're not just flapping your gums, you're actually going out there and you're giving people something tangible.
Yeah.
And I value that. That's something that's really cool. Now, the cool thing for me is, as somebody that gets to observe this, is you actually enjoy that part.
Yes.
Like, that is something that I notice whenever we're talking about, well, it's appreciation season, it's all this. You, Faith, are like eyes lit up. It's like the bulb is going off in your head and you're thinking of all these awesome ideas. So can you give an example of some of those ideas, of some gifts you've given and just some things that you've done to physically show that appreciation for your people?
Right. So our team has come to expect this, right? They know if they've been serving a while, they're going to get an appreciation gift. So if somebody hands me an appreciation gift, oh, this is great. But if I open a gift that's personalized for me and I know that somebody put thought into it, again, that person values me. Because in order for you to know what I like, you have to listen to what I say, right?
That's right.
You have to listen to what are my hobbies? What do I do in my free time? You kind of learn that person. And so I love to be able to personalize the gifts to the person, right? So the guys, it's a little more difficult for me because I'm not a guy. But if I know
fishing poles will do.
Yes. So we have people that enjoy fishing or they enjoy hunting. And so I'm like, okay, well, I don't know exactly what they need. So instead of me just giving a gift card to a restaurant, I'm going to give them something to Cabela's or to Dick's Sporting Goods, or, you know what I mean? You personalize things. Or it might be a new mom. So I'm going to give her some kind of like spa scrub or a gift to the spa, or, you know, something that, you know, some candles and some nice lotion, something to help her pamper herself. You know, so just kind of, I wouldn't say getting into the head of your person, but getting into their life a little bit. Like, what do they enjoy? What do they like? And so, of course, this takes work beforehand, you know, getting to know your people, getting to know what they like and what their interests are. And so I feel like when you hand them that gift, it means more to them than just some random gift. Hey, this person, they've listened to me. You know, they were thinking about me when they were buying this, because it's all stuff that I like. For me, that it might not come easy for everyone. For me, I enjoy doing that. It's one of my love languages is giving. So I love to do that. It thrills me to be able to put something together for somebody and to see the look on their face of, oh my gosh, how did you know? Type look. You know, I love that. But that's not a gift for everybody. And so I just say, get to know your people. That's the best way to do it. Personalize it. You know, personalize everything. Yeah. Personalize your conversation. So it's not just, hey, how are you this morning? But, hey, how's your dad doing? I heard he's in the hospital. You know, and again, this works not just in church, but in the secular world and in the corporate world. Like, know what is going on with the people that are working for you. Know what's going on with your team so that you know what type of conversations to have. So you're constantly thinking value. How can I show them that I value them?
Exactly. And it's kind of funny because I read Daniel Pink's book called Drive, and he talks about if then rewards versus now that rewards. And if then rewards are like the carrot on the stick, where it's like, if you do this, you will get this. But what I'm hearing, and this is coming full circle, is that regardless of the skill set of the individual, regardless of the quality of their work, if they are giving of their time, they get a gift. And it's now that you have done this, we are going to bless you with this. And I do think that the corporate world could learn from that, because in the corporate world where I cut my teeth, if the quality of your work isn't escalating, then you get diminishing returns on any kind of reward. And that leaves people feeling like nothing they do is ever going to be good enough. Nothing that they do is ever going to be appreciated. So kind of talk to that idea of showing gratitude for people and the time that they give, even if their work isn't the best.
Right. So this may sound kind of funny, but I see a lot of similarities in leadership and in parenting. Okay. So one of those similarities would be celebrating the small wins, right? Celebrating the good. So if I have a child that is struggling in an area, it may seem, like you said, they may feel like, oh, I'm giving my best, but then one day that they mess up again, right? And it's easy for me as a parent to shame them or to get on them for messing up. But sometimes I forget that the days that they're doing better, that if I were to encourage that it would help push them forward, it would propel them. So I feel like it's the same thing. So it's looking for those small wins. So they may not, there may be a lot of progress that they need to make, but you see them striving for that. So you might just see a small little thing that has improved. Celebrate that. Celebrate the small wins and make that big. And so that's going to encourage them to push harder, to push further towards the goal of where you're wanting them to be. And also, sometimes it helps to come alongside them and say, as a leader, maybe you're struggling because I'm doing something wrong.
Oh, man.
Maybe
you know how hard that is for leaders to say?
Maybe maybe you didn't get this right because I didn't communicate it properly. And sometimes that is the case, you know?
I'd say more often than not.
Right. And understanding, like kids, adults have different ways that they learn. Some of us are visual learners. Some of us learn by hearing. Some of us learn by hands-on and doing. So maybe I just need to teach it to them a different way. Maybe I need to take some time, a little more time to spend with them and walk them through this and do a little bit more coaching instead of saying, you need to get this right. What's your problem? Why aren't, you're not doing what you need to be doing. You're missing the mark over and over again. I don't know that that's going to help anything. That's not pushing them towards it. But if I'm in their shoes and I have a leader that is willing to sit down with me and say, okay, maybe I miscommunicated, or is there something that I might need to be doing differently to help you in this role? And maybe it is, maybe it's not, but just the point of sitting down with them and walking them through, okay, maybe we need to go through this again. Let me show you how to do it. Okay, no, you show me how you're going to do this, or a little more hands-on sometimes. Again, you're showing value. You're showing an investment. Especially in today's culture, time is huge. Time shows value. Time shows worth. What are the things that we invest our time in, are the things that mean the most to us, right? So it's going to mean a lot to an employee if you walk away from your desk for a little bit to sit down and take some time with them and work with them through something and try to help them invest a little bit more in them, even if it's not in your job description. It should be, but
as a pastor, that's not your job description, right? Isn't always to train people, but your job is to appreciate and show gratitude. So I love the fact that you're saying right now that gratitude can come in the form of time. It comes in the form of relationships. It can come in the form of gifts. But whatever it is, do it for the other people.
Right.
You shared such an amazing story with us. Honestly, your life has encapsulated so much of what I needed to hear, but so much of what God's grace has been throughout all the stories in the Bible. You see people mess up. Moses messed up. Jonah messed up. All these people who messed up, but God took that situation and created it for his glory.
Right.
You sharing the story of the mistakes you made as a teenager, but now you're taking those same lessons and you're imparting that gift to the people that serve underneath you and people that don't serve underneath you, right? That to me is an amazing, amazing story. And I can't wait to see, what God does with the next 40 something years of your life, right?
Yeah.
Because hopefully he blesses you with that. And those lessons you learn there will be even greater than the ones that you've shared with us today. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Faith. I mean that.
Thank you for inviting me. This has been great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're listening or you're out there, I just want to encourage you to just keep pressing on and find out what layers, as Faith was saying, are trapping or blocking you from being able to have gratitude for the things that God has done for you already. And you never know what he's going to do for you in your life. So keep pressing on, keep fighting the good fight. And remember, hope can only be found in Jesus. So this was Uncuffed, episode 12, Lessons in Gratitude. And I will see you next time.